What is going on, everybody? In today's video, we are going to be going over my 5 most drafted players in fantasy football drafts right now. So I'll be talking about why I have such high exposure to these players and breaking down why I think you should also start to draft some of these players. These are my most drafted players in Underdog drafts right now. If you guys are new to Underdog fantasy football, don't forget I run several streams throughout the week where I go round by round and show you guys how I throw together underdog teams. If you guys are ready to draft and you don't want to wait any longer, go ahead and hop in some underdog drafts. These are the most competitive fantasy football drafts going on right now. They will continue to be the most competitive moving into the month of August. This will get you guys fully prepared for your upcoming fantasy football drafts, for your redraft season. This will get you guys tuned into those later rounds and get you just feeling fully prepared to smash mock drafts in your home leagues as well as your redraft season overall. Don't forget promo code the catch, link is down below as well, gets you a first time 50% deposit match up to $250 on Underdog Fantasy. And you can come out and join the drafts that I hop into on live streams and get round by round advice from myself live. And like I said, I'll show you how I draft teams round by round on those streams as well. Don't wait. Now is the time to hop into these drafts before they start to heat up in the month of August. All right, first on today's list, we're going to be talking about Demarcus Robinson of the Rams. Okay, this is my most drafted player, regardless of position, in Underdog Fantasy right now. I have a 56.3 exposure to Demarcus Robinson, which is insanely high, but it's also common for a later round player to be your most drafted player because continuously I just end up in a position where Demarcus Robinson is there. I want to be heavy at wide receiver. It's my wide receiver 7, wide receiver 6, sometimes a wide receiver 8 that I'm taking off the board at an ADP of 169.2. He's going very late in drafts. It's not hurting the rest of your draft to take Demarcus Robinson off of the board. And in our subscriber PPR mock drafts that we've been doing, Demarcus Robinson is almost always my final selection because once again, I practice for a double flex league. But even if you don't, as long as you're practicing for a full PPR league, you want to be heavy at wide receiver. And I think Demarcus Robinson, really regardless of format, is just a great value right now. When you look down the stretch in the last couple games of the season for the Rams, weeks 13 through 17, he absolutely balled out in full PPR. 15.5, 13.6, 14.7, 20.2, 13.2. Those are his PPR points scored. 4 touchdowns in that stretch. God forbid something happens to Cooper Kupp or Puka Nacua this season. He is in line right away to be a wide receiver too. Okay. But even if he's not, this is his second year in this offense. He is going to contribute heavily. He's going to be part of the offensive game plan week in and week out. Don't overlook this Rams offense last year. Don't overlook this Rams team. As long as everyone is healthy here, this is still a very good offense and an offense that's going to produce a lot of fantasy points this season. So Demarcus Robinson, essentially a free pick, especially in redraft formats, but in underdog formats, best ball formats, I guess I should say, he is essentially still a free pick. And I just think there's too much upside here tied to too good of an offense. And he's a player who I've seen throughout the offseason really move up in ADP. He's almost moved up 20 entire spots since I started drafting in best ball drafts this off season. So start to get some shares of him now because I think a lot of players who are going after Matthew Stafford at quarterback and then Puka Nacua, Cooper Kupp, Kyron Williams earlier are going to want Demarcus Robinson on their team. Overall, just a free pick. Take him off the board. He is worth the selection where he's going in drafts. All right, next on the list, I've got Gus the Bus himself. He is my second highest most drafted player at a current exposure of 37.5. Gus the Bus, Gus Edwards, 13 rushing touchdowns last year in that Ravens offense, and now he joins the Chargers in another run-heavy offense. And I get, like, some people would rather draft J.K. Dobbins super late, I guess, or maybe take a chance on Vidal, the rookie running back. And I am getting some shares of Vidal as well. I think, at his current ADP, he's definitely worth drafting because what we do know is that this Jim Harbaugh offense is going to be a run heavy offense. Okay. And right now, I think even with those other two names I just mentioned at running back, Gus Edwards is still the clear RB1 in this offense. He's a little bit older at age 29, but I've talked about this before in the offseason. Even though he's played several seasons with the Ravens, he has had a lot of other running backs in front of him, and then a little bit of injury history in 2021, 2022. So ultimately, compared to other running backs who are age 29, he doesn't have as much wear and tear overall. He hasn't gotten as many touches, and that's another thing with the Ravens offense traditionally is they rotate a lot of different running backs. So he's a little bit fresher, I would argue, at age 29 than other age 29 running backs. But once again, a very productive season last year, a lot of goal line work. Like even if you look at things, 4.09 yards per carry, not bad. 810 rushing yards, not bad, but those aren't spectacular marks. And he's not a receiving running back either, but he got all the goal line work. And I think right now, when you look at the makeup of this Chargers roster, this is the guy in line for goal line work in a very run heavy offense. He should be a lock for double digit touchdowns. And once again, he's the RB1. Like you're drafting an RB1 super late in drafts right now. He's ranked as the RB35 on Underdog. Just go and get shares of Gus Edwards. He's another player who I've seen move up a little bit in ADP, but also just become more popular to draft. And if you're taking Gus Edwards as your RB4, you should be feeling really good. Just start to get some shares of him. I think he's going to have a very, very good season based on where he's being drafted at his current ADP. Next up, I've got Hollywood Brown, now with the Kansas City Chiefs, going at an ADP of 52.2 on Underdog. And right now, I also have a current exposure of 37.5 to Hollywood Brown. And I should mention, so far, like 70% of my Underdog drafts have been between the 1.1 and the 1.5. So I've kind of been in position to draft a lot of similar players. And that has led me, in those earlier picks, you're in position to draft a lot of the Kansas City Chiefs wide receivers with the Patrick Mahomes stack. But I have been doing that quite a bit. But even then, like, I just think there's really good value on the Kansas City Chiefs wide receivers overall. I have a pretty high exposure to Rashee Rice as well, who I think is another player who is just going at a tremendous value. I have him at 21.9 current exposure, 21.9 percentage, excuse me. But overall, Hollywood Brown is a player that I just find myself drafting over and over again as like a wide receiver 4, sometimes a wide receiver 5 if I've started really aggressive at wide receiver in Underdog drafts. And then in PPR mock drafts, like I'm like kind of drafting him against Sleeper's current ADP, which is 77.5. And a lot of times I'm taking Hollywood Brown in PPR mock drafts as a wide receiver 4 or 5. And I just think there's way too much upside here to ignore. And I get it. Like there's some injury history here. There's the drops. Like there's reasons why people don't like Hollywood Brown. But especially once Rashee Rice is back from suspension, and now we have Xavier Worthy, who Xavier Worthy's going close in ADP to Hollywood. If that's your guy, fine. But I'll take the, kind of the veteran-esque player who's already been in the NFL here. And overall, once they're all on the field here, Hollywood Brown, doesn't have to line up as a true wide receiver 1. It can really play to his strengths. And I mean, Patrick Mahomes is going to help Hollywood Brown play to his strengths. I just think this might be the best Patrick Mahomes season we ever see. I think you can really argue that when you look at this offense on paper. And once again, just way too much upside here. And Hollywood Brown, regardless, is going to start the season more than likely as a wide receiver 1 for the Chiefs. So the volume's going to be there. The chemistry should be there early on. And, assuming Rashee Rice does get suspended, even once Rashee Rice is back, I think this offense is just going to be firing on all cylinders. Way too much upside here, tied to way too good of a quarterback, way too good of a system to be going as late as he is in drafts right now. So I have a very high exposure to Hollywood Brown, and really think more people out there should be considering him both in best ball and in redraft formats as we get closer to August. All right, number 4 overall, this is going to trigger some people, but once again, later round picks typically have higher exposure because you're drafting some of these players as your QB2, wide receiver 7, RB4, whatever it may be. And yeah, I have a lot of shares of Baker Mayfield. He is my most drafted quarterback. kind of by a large margin at a current exposure of 34.4%. And I'll defend this all day long because once again, I'm drafting Baker Mayfield as a QB2 or 3 a majority of the time. Every now and then, I might take a zero QB approach and Baker might be my QB1, but most of the time he's my QB2. And once again, I'm drafting a lot of Mike Evans and or Chris Godwin, so I'm kind of going for that stack. But just overall, a current ADP of 168.8 on Underdog and on Sleeper, a ADP of 171.6. Was the QB10 in fantasy football last year. And when you break things down, he had some down games, sure, but he had enough games to rank him in the top 10. And overall, I just don't see this offense changing next year. I really don't. When you look at on paper, nothing has really changed here other than they drafted Jalen McMillan to be, an additional wide receiver on this team. So, we've still got Mike Evans here. We still got Chris Godwin, who's now going to be able to play in the slot. You got McMillan, you got Cade Otton, Rashad White, a phenomenal receiving running back. So everything's in line here for Baker to have another good season. Like I understand that Dave Canales is no longer on this team, and he was kind of the, guy who saved Geno Smith and then ended up saving Baker Mayfield. You could argue last year he's no longer the offensive coordinator. He's now going to go potentially help out Bryce Young have a much better career than what we saw in his rookie season. But overall, Baker, I think, can definitely finish as a top 15 fantasy quarterback again. And, while I have an exposure of 34.4%, and I am kind of trying to get that number down a little bit, I'm drafting him commonly as a QB2, and I think he's going to go undrafted in most redraft formats, but he's definitely a guy who I could see early in the season popping up on the waiver wire as a QB that's going to end up on fantasy football teams. So don't overlook Baker. I think he's actually going to be just fine moving into the season, but I have got some heat here and there for still liking Baker, but I don't really understand. I think he can definitely finish close to what he did last season. Only time will tell. Let me know down below how you guys feel. All right, last but not least, we're going to talk about tight end Dalton Schultz of the Houston Texans, who I have a current exposure of 34.4% to, and he's currently going an ADP of 107.8 on Sleeper. Sometimes in our PPR mock drafts with our subscriber base, I see Dalton Schultz go undrafted or he goes in the final round of the draft. Then on Underdog, he's going at an ADP of 130.1. So overall, there's a couple things to break down here. Okay, Schultz, a good finish last year, a top 10 tight end, 5 receiving touchdowns, 635 receiving yards off of 59 receptions. Now, it's fair to say the receptions targets will go down this year because now we have Stephon Diggs in this offense, and Nico Collins, Tank Dell, obviously going to get a lot of targets themselves. Joe Mixon's now here to help out that run game a little bit more than maybe what we saw out of Devin Singletary and Dameon Pierce, who's still on the roster last year. But listen, CJ Stroud in line to, once again finish as top 12 quarterback easily. Some people are already arguing, Stroud into the top 8, top 5, however you want to look at it. He was the QB 11 last year. He's going to have, I think, an improved season based on what he did at the quarterback position in his rookie season. This might be one of the best offenses in the NFL, if not the best offense. So in terms of fantasy points scored, there's plenty to go around here. I'm not going to necessarily panic about the addition of Stephon Diggs in this offense, or maybe goal line touches going to Joe Mixon, because I still think Dalton Schultz is going to get plenty of looks in the red zone. And, I think you can easily argue that with Diggs, Collins, and Dell out there's going to be a lot of times where defenses just aren't going to be able to, give the appropriate coverage to Dalton Schultz. I think he's going to be out there and people are just going to overlook him. I think it's going to happen with the 3 receivers on this team too. It's just a hard offense to defend, but I don't think that Schultz should be, as overlooked as he's being right now in fantasy drafts just because Stephon Diggs is now on this team. I think this offense is going to score a lot of fantasy points. I think they're going to score more points and more fantasy points overall because Stephon Diggs is there and because those other 2, dynamic, high volume wide receivers in Collins and Dell are there, and because they have a great young quarterback in CJ Stroud. So Schultz at his current ADP, I think is a really good value. And once again, I am trying to get this exposure a little bit down because he is easily my highest rated or highest drafted tight end, my next highest drafted tight end, once again, a late round guy is Chicken Conquo at 25%, but I don't really see an elite tight end in my exposure total, I get to the fourth spot in Evan Ingram at 18.8%, and then Jake Ferguson at 15.6%. And then Kincaid doesn't even come in until 9.4%, right next to George Kittle. So I am trying to get that down a little bit. But once again, this is a late round player who, and a lot of times I'm drafting as a tight end too. And I think if you are drafting Dalton Schultz, he's a great tight end too to have behind a guy like Kincaid, McBride, Andrews, whoever you're targeting as that quote unquote elite tight end. I still think he's going to have plenty of good games and a very productive fantasy season. So don't overlook Dalton Schultz. His Texans offense should be firing all cylinders, should be very, very good for fantasy football in 2024. All right, and that'll do it for today's video. If you guys did enjoy the content, this is all we do here all season long. Free fantasy football content, redraft, dynasty, and best ball. If you guys are into that, be sure to subscribe. On the way out, leave me a comment. Let me know what you thought about today's video. Hit the like, do all that YouTube stuff. Check out our links down below. We are running PPR mock drafts all week long. You can join those by joining our free Discord, and you guys can look out for my streams when I am hopping into Underdog fantasy football drafts. You can get round by round free advice if you draft with me, and you guys can see what I do round by round and just kind of go off that as well. So with that, I will say thank you guys so much for watching and or listening, and remember, you saw it here on the catch.